This is Vanessa Gorman, and I've saved for this chapter all the elements of direct speech. So if you're going to read Plato or if you're going to read conversations of any sort, you're going to get elements that we haven't seen a whole lot of yet. In the Hellenica, you'll see speeches, not so many dialogues, not so much back and forth, but you will see a number of speeches. Now, speeches have elements that regular narrative does not contain. Um, and I pulled out a piece of Plato's Euthyphro because it's a dialogue and it will concentrate a lot of these elements in one place. So this is a fun little dialogue between Plato and Euthyphro about what is piety, kind of a comic dialogue. And you'll notice there's some elements you don't know how to do yet. So, for example, there are first and second person pronouns, the words you, the word I, we. With these pronouns come verbs. First and second person verbs we have not yet dealt with. We've kept the verb very simple. Direct questions we have talked about to some extent. I want to review them again. Direct address, that is, oh, Socrates. You know, when you say someone's name because you're talking to them, this is what we use the vocative case for with nouns, which I told you don't worry about memorizing, and there's no reason to memorize it. There's also something called interjections in the name of Zeus, Euthyphro. So in other words, you know, cursing or words like alas, oh, what shall we do? So in all, what we have are things called external dependency, things that don't fit in the syntax of the sentence. And by this, I mean things like interjections and vocatives. Just like I say, cursing, swearing, alas, these kinds of words. Direct questions. We've talked about to some extent. We're going to review it again. First and second person pronouns and verbs. And then the final thing that we haven't really covered yet are the use of different moods in the independent clause of the sentence. So we've seen subjunctive and optatives already in dependent clauses, in subordinate clauses. Now we're going to see them, how they're used independently. They're not that common. If you're dealing with speech, you'll see them. If you're not dealing with speeches, you're not going to see them. Commands likewise. You can't have a command unless you have someone you're talking to. So the simplest first is EXD, elements that stand apart from the syntax of the sentence. They're very easy to spot because they tend to be either indeclinable or set prepositional phrases like by God. The editors tend to separate them off by commas. And you simply hang them on the main verb as an EXD. Likewise, nouns in the vocative case are hung as external dependency because they're not part of the syntax of the words. I should note that there are some phrases that give us problems, things like, you know, we should do this, or I think, or something like that. These are problematic, and some people think they ought to be labeled EXDs. I tend to put them as AUXYs. They tend to act like sentence adverbs, I think. Vocatives, I didn't have you memorize for a couple of reasons. One is they're usually preceded by the word O without a rough breathing notice, just O, set apart by commas, and they usually look like the nominative. So, O Andres, O Athenaioi, O Andres dikastiai, juryman. In the plural, it always does. In the singular, the vocative looks like the nominative for first declension feminines and most of the third declension nouns. So, O Boule, O Theramenes. The biggest exception, the thing you see the most common, are second declension masculines in the singular and with just an epsilon. So, O Hippe, O Anthrope, O man, O Pharnabatse. Again, they're usually separated by commas. They usually have the word O in front of them. They don't cause any trouble, so there's not any reason to memorize them separately. You'll only expect them in speeches. The vocative is also labeled EXD, so the Athenians call her not a dike, a private lawsuit, but a graphe, a public lawsuit. O Euthyphron. So very obviously it's set off by commas. We have the O in front of it. We know it's a vocative. You hang it as an EXD on the main verb. Notice this utoi here is not hutoi, those men, but rather the word u, not strengthened by the toi. Questions we've talked about before, but we'll talk about them more here. Remember, the sign of a question is a semicolon. There are questions that have yes, no answers, and sometimes that's all you get in the sentence is nai, yes, or panu, certainly, or panuda. Those are then labeled EXDs as well, because there's no verb to put them on. If you do have a verb asking a question and you're not expecting a certain kind of answer, you can make the sign that it's a question just by throwing the word ara in there. You don't translate it. It's just telling you early on in the sentence that it's going to be a question by the end. Sometimes you want to say, isn't it the truth that? So you want someone to agree with you. And the way you add that nuance is by saying something like uk un or aru or just oo. Isn't it the case that? So you'll see this, you'll get the hang of it as you get into dialogue, depending on what authors you want to read. The most common question words, we've already seen these, but I wanted to go over them again. Tis or ti, meaning who or what. T can also mean why in the sense of an adverbial accusative, or dia ti on account of what. Poteros, which of two. Pota, when, and pos, how. Less common ones you'll see as well. Again, that P is usually the sign of a question word among the correlatives. So that's questions, that's interjections. What about person? You've already seen plenty of third persons. Remember, we determine person by whether the word is referring to the speaker or writer, in which case it is I or we, the first person. If it is the addressee, it is you. And if it's a third party, then it is he, she, it, they, third person. In oblique cases, as you'll recall, we use autos for most of the just normal articles. So they left her in Caria. In the predicate position, it can also mean self, so the God himself, as opposed to the same God. In the attributive position, it can mean same. When standing alone in the nominative, it's an emphasize. It emphasizes it. They themselves did this, or if there's no subject stated, it just gives a strong reference to it. Because in the nominative, you don't need to state the subject, right? So third person pronoun is usually autos in the oblique cases. The sign of the first person is me, right? The mu as in me. But these are just my sort of shortcut ways of remembering. The sign of the second person is a sigma as in second. The sign of the first person plural is hey, as in hey. And the sign of the second person plural is who, as in you who, or I just look at it and say, oh, there's a you, therefore it's you. So if you remember these four things, M as in me, S as in second person, hey, I'm talking is the first person, you who, as in you who, it's you, it's the second person, and you've got yourself the pronouns. So the pronoun ego, our word ego, comes right from the Greek first person pronoun ego, but the rest of the word has M's in it, has mu's in it. So mu, moi, me. Then the first person plural, hey, hey mace, hey mon, hey min, hey mas. The second person, the sigma and the u, so su, soy, sa. Who mace, who mon, who min, who mas. So you see the you and you think second person plural, you. You is you. You, the letter, is you, the person. Sigma gives you second person M gives you first person singular. Eta gives you first person plural. The first and second person singular is unaccented if you're not emphasizing it. So if I'm not trying to emphasize the word, I just say mu without an accent. Moi, me. Same thing with su, soy, se. Ego and su are by definition emphasized because you don't need to put them in there because they're in the verb. The verb implies the first person or the second person. So you don't use the nominative unless you want to stress it. Reflexive pronouns. A reflexive rebounds back to the subject. So there is no nominative. If you look it up in the dictionary, it will list as the genitive. And the reflexive is simply he plus the word autos. So for the first person, the sign of the first person is a mu. You just add a mu. For the second person, the sign is a sigma. You add a sigma. So the reflexive pronouns are emmautu, emmauto, emmauton, myself. First person feminine, myself if I'm a feminine. Second person masculine, second person feminine. Mu is the sign of the first person singular. Sigma is the sign of the second person singular. For plurals in the reflexive, you simply use auton and the pronoun as separate words. So it's just what you've already seen. And so you yourselves, we ourselves. There is a third person pronoun you'll see sometimes, they themselves, which is a little bit redundant, but you will see space, sphon, sphici, and sphos, especially in Herodotus, I should say, but you will see this elsewhere, and it shouldn't throw you because it looks like the others. There's also adjectives corresponding to these things. The sign of the first person is the mu, so emos, emme, emmon, of first and second declension adjective, meaning my, sos, se, son, meaning yours, hemeteros, hemetera, hemeteron, meaning ours, humeteros, hemetera, humeteron, meaning yours. As before, the sve can mean theirs. All are just declined like regular third ending adjectives there. Don't give you much trouble. They look as you would expect them to look. All right, that leaves us with the biggest issue, which is the verbs in direct speech in Greek. And the characteristics of verb in direct speech is we see a lot more first and second person. We see imperative, which is command, go to war, but we also can use a separate mood for commands in second and third person. Go to war is generally a second person. We'll see optatives by themselves sometimes. And if you see an optative by themselves, remember that optative, if you're opt for something, you're hoping for something. So optatives by themselves, with or without on, have this central sense of potential or wish. Without the on, may we go to war? Potential. With the on, we might go to war. Not that common, but you will see them, and you'll see that you've got that funny Yoda there, and it's the main clause, and you say, independent optative. It's either a potential or a wish. Likewise, you can get subjunctives independently, and they tend to be this idea of things that are unreal. So, should we go to war, or let us go to war in the first person? It's should we go to war if it's got a question mark on it, and it's let us go to war if it doesn't. It's a way of making a soft command in the first person because you can't use imperatives for commands. And you can also make it the negative. Instead of shall we, it's let's not. So do not go to war, what we call prohibitive. You don't see them very often. You can look them up when you need to. If you're reading a lot of dialogue that has these, you can find them. It's one of those things that I tend to look up when I run into them if I can't remember. But as a rule, optative is potential or wish, and subjunctive tends to be deliberative or prohibitive or hortatory. Now, what about first and second person endings? if you're going to memorize anything, memorize these sets of endings. There's only really a couple that will show up a lot. O, ace, a, omen, ete, si. Usi is how I usually remember it. These are your basic active endings. O, ace, a, omen, ete, usi. These are for primary endings, right? The tenses that are not past tense. So to make the future, sign of the future is a sigma. Guess what? The future is the same thing with the sigma. Luso, luces, luce. So luso, I will dissolve. I will break apart. The present subjunctive, guess what? You make the vowel long. It's the same word with the vowels long. The present optative, guess what? You have a iota in there. You can have a me on the first person singular. That shouldn't throw you off too much because you've already seen a bunch of me verbs. So the primary endings, very easy, right? O, ace, a, omen, ete, usi. Remember those 6 words. That's what you need to remember. Secondary endings in the active, I leave luo up there as by way of comparison. The secondary endings are on, s, a, omen, ete, on. So they're the same ending softened. Instead of long O, you get a short O with a nu on it. Instead of ace, you get S. Omen is the same. Ete is the same. Instead of usi, it's just on, right? And these are the secondary endings that we use on the imperfects and on the second aorists. Notice that the first person singular and the third person plural look exactly alike. Likewise, in the aorist, same endings. You're just using the third principal part instead of the first. So you're using the aorist stem and you come up with the same forms. So o, ace, a, omen, ete, usi, on, s, a, omen, ete, on. Not too tough. The middle and passive endings are even easier because there's only 2 sets of them. My, psi, tai, methys, that, and tai. That's the primary endings for the non-past tenses. So this will be in the middle, this will be in the passive as a rule. Aorist will be on its own, but we'll come back to aorist. If it's a secondary, or sorry, if it's the subjunctive, guess what? You just lengthen the vowel. If it's an optative, guess what? You put a iota in there. No big deal. So these are the primary endings in the active and middle. The only one that gives trouble is the second person singular. There's a sigma in there that dropped out. So my, psi, tai. You'll see it in the perfect because the perfect keeps it. But other than that, it doesn't give any trouble. The secondary endings in the middle and passive, main, so, to, methys, that, nto. So my, psi, tai, main, so, to. It's not like it's a trick, it's just a shift in the vowel sound. Aorist indicative, little bit odd, you've got to go off the aorist stem. So sa, main, so, sato, samitha, sastha, santo, right? You've got the sigma as the sign of the aorist. You've got the augment as the sign of a past tense, and its secondary endings. You just have to know that this is coming from the third principal part or it's coming from the first principal part, whether it's aorist, imperfect, or whether it's imperfect or aorist. So the summary of the endings. These are the forms that are worth learning. It's not very hard. You already know a third of them because you know the third person singular and the third person plural. We're just adding in the first persons and the second persons. Here is a chart that will let you see how the aorist works, because the aorist can be a little bit odd. The thing you have to remember is the aorist indicative active, this should say active, not indicative, is based on the third principal part, sa, sa, se, saman, sate, san, or if it's a strong aorist, on, s, the secondary endings, right? So primary endings, which get a little weird, you get the sa, sas instead of the others, but the rest look fine. In the middle, main, so, to, main, so, to. In the aorist passive, the sign of the aorist passive is the theta, and so instead of main soto. It's just ein ace a mente san. This is going to be a little odd. The aorist passive is going to be a little odd. However, it's got the augment, it's got the theta, it's an aorist passive. Imperatives, I never bother learning. I got to say that. They're usually absolutely obvious from context. So if you want to tell someone to do something in the first person, so let us do something, you use the hortatory subjunctive most of the time, an independent subjunctive. If you want to use the second person, you do something. In the plural, it looks just the same as the indicative. In the singular, it just has a short E ending. In the middle passive, it becomes oo. And then in the third person, they should do something. You have eto, estho, onton, esthon. Could I reproduce them? No, because I never see them. Are they easy to spot? Sure, because they don't look like other things. That omega ending especially kind of gives it away, the eto, estho. And Alphaeus will identify them when you need them. You're only going to find them in direct speech. So when you're in a direct speech, you expect these things. You look for these things. All of these elements we've talked about. But when you're not in direct speech, you're not going to find them. And so context can help you a great deal. Okay, let's look at a few sample trees before we finish here. O Pharnabatse. Okay, you see right away, O Pharnabatse, you know it's evocative. Ho aner soi, ho emos. The mine, that's the possessive adjective. The man, the one of mine. So my husband, my man. He was to you, soi, again, the sigma is the sign of you, second person singular. So my husband was a friend to you. Ta'ala. Ta'ala is going to be an accusative of respect in regards to other things. So my husband was a friend to you also in other respects. And Epi did do, he gave tribute, just as su. Sigma is the sign of the second person singular. With the result that you honored him, you honored etimas is second person singular, you honored him, praising him. This is a participle in the nominative singular masculine because you, Pharnabates, are nominative and singular masculine in this clause. Su is the nominative singular masculine pronoun. So we have a possessive adjective here, emos. We have a pronoun soi, the dative singular meaning you. And we have the nominative singular meaning you. And we have etimas, you honored. Okay, here we have a conditional sentence. On starts the sentence. That's a pretty good sign it's going to be a conditional, and we see ego right up front. So we're stressing the ego because we don't need it. It's in the verb. If I served you, ego hupereto soi. I served you. You serve someone in the dative. Not at all less than he did. So not at all less than him. Genitive of comparison. Less is the adjective in the accusative singular, adverbial accusative. Not at all. We see this here a lot. In fact, I'd be tempted to label it as an auxiliary. Why is a question. Notice there's a semicolon here, which starts the main clause with why. Why or what, but when we see it as necessary. Why is it necessary for you, say, to make another man satrap? So if I serve you no less than he did, this is consecutive sentences, by the way, so talking about her husband. Why is it necessary for you to make someone else satrap? So we have ego, the first person pronoun. We have soi, the second person pronoun in the dative, and in the accusative, here it's acting as the subject of the infinitive. All right. You, by God, pros Dios. So right there we have an exclamation. So we know we're going to hang that as an EXD. The preposition remains a preposition. The object of the preposition is the EXD. Then we have O euthyphron. So that's also going to be an EXD because that is the vocative. The O tells you that. So by God, O euthyphron, they're both EXDs, external dependencies. They aren't fitting into the syntax of the sentence. You, however, we see up front is the nominative pronoun you. You thus think, oiomai, you think, you understand concerning godly things, right? The word theos is God, theos is the adjective, correctly, accurately. So here we have two EXDs and we have the second person nominative pronoun and a second person verb, you think. Now the iota there is not a sign of the optative because the root word is oiomai. Here's another one, a little bit longer. O Andres Bouleutai, O men of the council, O counselors, right? O senators, in other words. So that is a vocative. We know we're going to hang that as an EXD. If, okay, we have a conditional sentence. If we've got a men, which may or may not mean anything that matters here. If tis humane, tis unaccented, someone of you, right? The letter U indicates the person you, plural. If anyone of you thinks that more are dying to Kairu, so more people are dying. More people is the subject of dying. If any one of you thinks that more people are dying, more than what? Genitive of comparison. Kairos means this idea of crisis or the proper time or what is proper or what is, it's just intranslatable really. But in this sense, it's more than it's proper. Usually it means the exact right time or something like that. So if any one of you thinks that more people are dying than is proper, consider. We have this weird sato ending, and so the Alpheus will tell you that it is the third person singular aorist active imperative. I am telling him, right? This is the third person him. Who's the him I'm talking to? I'm talking about the him, the tis. If any of you thinks that more people are dying than is right, consider that indirect statement. These things happen everywhere where constitutions change, where there are revolutions. So these things happen everywhere, pantahu, and then we have a relative clause, hopu, modifying everywhere. So it's an adverb modifying an adverb, where constitutions change. So here we have an imperative, and that's how you use a third person imperative, something like this. Tell me. Again, this is an imperative. This is a second person imperative. Tell me, but it's sort of an aside. Tell me, did they say what you were doing when you corrupted the young men? So they said that you were corrupting the young men. Indirect statement with an infinitive subject is say in the accusative. Doing what? So doing is a participle in the masculine singular accusative modifying you. So you, when you were doing what? T, indirect question there, corrupted the young men. So lege moi, tell me, is just sort of an aside, right? We do it too, right? Tell me, what do you want to do? And you can do several things. You could hang it as a completely different sentence, but that seems kind of silly. To me, it's just qualifying the whole tone of the sentence, and so I hang it as an aux y on the facey. I think that's the only way to make good sense out of it. Now I am going away, he said, in order to prepare guest gifts for you. So I am going away. He said, again, we have this problem. We've got a direct speech with a he said in the middle, and we've debated how to hang these things, and we finally decided to make it an aux y most of the time. The he said. It's an aside. It doesn't relate to the rest of the sentence. It qualifies the whole sentence. So I, ego, am going away. And then we have this participle, a future participle. It's got a sigma in it. Gives you the sense of purpose. Preparing xenia, guest gifts, for you, soy, the dative pronoun for the singular, second person singular, right? It has the sigma in it. And finally, and he said, no, by Zeus. Okay. He said, Fa is in the middle here. Let's pull that out. He said, Hoda. We're going to pull that out as an aux y. And he said, no, by Zeus. No, by Zeus. Since. Okay, we have no main clause. He goes right into a because clause. And we do that when we speak, right? We don't speak in correct grammatical sentences, but to hang it properly, you need some implied main verb. So I just supplied a blank space to be the main verb. No, whatever, he said, by God, since shameful, ice crone, neuter, and then the rest of the sentence continues without a verb. So it is shameful is what we always look for in Greek. So that's a neuter nominative, P-nom. What is shameful is going to be expressed with infinitives. To be entertained, passive. We've got the same word. Xenia means guest friend. Xenos is a guest friend. The verb from it in the passive, to be entertained by you, not to entertain you. So see, he's making a great contrast between active and passive here. So it would be shameful for me to be entertained by you and not to entertain you. Tethukota, this is a perfect, got the kappa in there and the reduplication from thuo. Having sacrificed. I just sacrificed. So it would be horrible if you entertained me when I just made a sacrifice and I have all this stuff ready, is essentially the way we do this. So you see with dialogues, a lot of times in Greek, just like in English, we don't speak grammatically, and you have to fill in certain elements to make the tree work. But hopefully when you see this, you can read the tree and put it all together again.